Imagine you are part of the Ukrainian team negotiating with Russia when Russia is attacking your country and killing your people. That's what Rustem Umerov is doing. He's a Ukrainian MP and he's part of the delegation holding peace talks with Russia. He, along with Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich, suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning earlier this month after a meeting in Kyiv. I spoke to him earlier today from a location he preferred not to disclose. Mr. Umerov, thank you so much for taking time with us. I know that Ukraine wants this war to end, of course. The whole world does. Everyone wants peace. But after more than 2 months of an invasion, of terrible aggression, attacks on civilians, there's still no sign of peace. So do you have hope?
Well, we always have hope. Nevertheless, as you know, from 24th of February, Russia attacked us. They launch a full-scale war against us, and we ought to fight back, protect our cities, our children, our women, elders, and we also wanted to show all the world that we are able to open up diplomatic channels of negotiations. We wanted the world to know that even though we are protecting the European security, the global security, we're able to negotiate for the peace because we understand that this war can bring more bloodshed to the region. So that is why, yes, we are hopeful, but the decision to ending this war is in Kremlin.
Yeah, it's up to Vladimir Putin to end it.
Yes.
How do you sit at a table and have peace talks with the Russian side when so many Ukrainians are being killed?
Well, as I told you, this is extremely hard emotionally, physically, but because we know that if it will continue, it will kill more people, we assume that we are wartime peace envoys. So that is why we have to take it into consideration that if we don't sit, we don't negotiate, we don't find a solution, it will continue. So that is why we have to take it serious, and we take it as our job. So that is why it is physically and mentally hard, but we need to continue.
Is it possible to negotiate with a man like Vladimir Putin? I know you're not in the room with him, but he is most definitely in charge.
It is hard because he tries to open up several verticals, which means that legally when you negotiate with on one topic, you constantly are fighting back in the field. In addition, he goes and fights you in the media. So basically, there are up to 5-6 different dimensions that you have to fight. The decision is only in his head. So the only person who can stop this bloodshed is Vladimir Putin. But at this stage, as I said, every person who comes to negotiations, they have their own mandate. And every person is mandated to negotiate his own block. So at this stage, it's hard, but it doesn't constitute that it's impossible.
What is your mandate then?
My job is to mediate, to architecturize these negotiations so that they happen physically. We don't stop in being in contact with them. We have groups that are represented by Ministry of Defense, General Chiefs of Staff, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There are humanitarian issues. But at the end of these negotiations, we were able to evacuate up to 300,000 people from 6 different regions, 45 different locations. And now we're working on possible evacuation of people from Mariupol. So, which means that even though it's hard, but we save life. So that's why we need to be continuing it.
The evacuation from Mariupol particularly difficult. I know there have been so many kind of false starts, if you like, hopes that it was going to happen, apparent agreements that fell apart.
It is extremely hard to agree on something with them. Why? Because when you negotiate, you discuss different categories of people, children, wounded, women, maybe kidnapped people. So when it comes to the implementation, there are always games. Why? Because they could give you the one checkpoint, but they will be coming to another checkpoint. So there are many peculiarities, and we take it seriously. Nevertheless, we understand that they don't keep promises, and that's why we sometimes ask the international community, international partners to be able to witness it. Why? Because they're twisting the story in world media, saying that Ukraine is responsible. But I would like to say that Ukraine is trying to defend its own territory. Ukraine is trying to save as many lives as possible. So that is why we're trying to evacuate people wounded, kidnapped, people that were even children. Just recently, we brought back 2 children that were forcibly taken to Russian Federation. We know that there are many people killed and their children forcibly taken to Russian Federation. But we're fighting for every person and for every part of our territory and for the democracy. So that is why we are continuing these negotiations.
You were one of the people, I understand it, along with Roman Abramovich, who had symptoms of poisoning after one session of peace talks. Can you tell me about that and the effect it had on you?
Well, I already informed the media that I'm fine at the moment, but it happened maybe 3-4 weeks ago. Nevertheless, my colleagues who are more into details, whether it was a chemical or magnetic poisoning, I'm not sure. So that's why I'm not trying to tell more about it, but they're working on it. And soon I hope they will come up with a result. What was it? But at the moment, I am fine and I'm continuing my job.
Can you help me understand, or what your understanding is of Roman Abramovich's role in this? He's one of Russia's richest oligarchs, of course, said to be close to Vladimir Putin. What is he doing there?
Well, he is independent. He's not part of the Russian delegation. Nevertheless, he is a mediator. He tries to mediate. He tries, since he's not from the state, let's say, affairs. So sometimes there are issues that is hard to discuss. So he goes to the Russian part and discusses how we perceive this issue. So his role is mandated also in making negotiations continue. Mainly he tries to focus on to the humanitarian bloc, as I said, like those kind of exits or evacuation corridors. So at this stage, I cannot answer on behalf of him, but he's involved in mediation as well.
The West is, of course, providing more lethal weapons, more every day. The rhetoric, too, is ramping up. The U.S. Defense Secretary says he wants Russia weakened. Russia's foreign minister says the West is waging a proxy war against Russia and warns of provoking World War III. What do you read into all that, and how worried should the world be?
Well, the world should definitely be worried. Why? Because the war already started. So every person who is not involved at this stage should be thinking that it helps then Russia if it is not involved in finishing the war. On the supply side, we appreciate Canada's support for $500 million support they provided, and now they will be providing some APCs, armored vehicles. We appreciate it. We appreciate Canadian people for the support, for the political and diplomatic support that Canada does. Nevertheless, the world should be focused on what Ukraine needs in the fields. So when we talk a lot about potential supply, it doesn't constitute that this equipment has been brought to Ukraine, has been brought to the fields, to the armed forces, because we have allegedly second largest army fighting against us, and we don't have any equipment at this stage to fight them back. So that is why the world should be focusing whether we have it rather than potentially supplying it. So if Ukrainian armed forces doesn't have it on the field, it means that nothing is done. So at this stage, what world could do is to supply immediately and bring it logistically to the fields. That could be a big support to us, to our armed forces, and to our resistance.
It sounds like you're telling me promises have been made, but not necessarily delivered on.
Well, I would say that as a person who is now supervising some of the issues related to this bloc, there are many rules and regulations related to the lethal and non-lethal supplies. Is it fortunate or unfortunate for Ukraine? It's unfortunate because we need it immediately, but it has been regulated a long time before us. And to get through these regulations, it's very hard, because sometimes countries are saying that we're able to supply, but we don't want to supply directly. Let's use the third countries. Sometimes they say we can make an agreement, but we cannot make payment. Sometimes they make payment, but they cannot make logistics directly. So basically speaking, most of the world is now concerned on how they will be looking in Russianize rather than supplying Ukrainian armed forces with equipment. Unfortunately, still many countries are afraid to supply directly to Ukraine because they will be in bad situation with Russian Federation on diplomatic stance or political stance. And is it a double standards? I don't know, but we're fighting not only for our own independence, but for the European and global security. So we need the world to know that diplomacy and politics works until the bombs finished. So at this stage, we need to fight back in the fields, and we need their support. So they should not be playing around, trying to convince us that they will be in bad situations with Russia. Russians are killing us. So that is why we want world to help us and bring the equipment to the fields.
Do you think that Canada has done enough and has acted fast enough?
Canada is active. Canada is helping diplomatically, politically. As I already mentioned, they already supplied $500 million, and they will be supplying some APCs, armored vehicles. Nevertheless, the speed is extremely important. So we need to supply as much equipment as we can. Otherwise, this may become a beginning of Third World War. It is already in progress. But if we are not going to defend Ukraine, it means that all the other countries will be threatened by Russia. And we are the only country at the moment able to fight back Russian Federation.
This, of course, is not the first time Vladimir Putin has invaded one of his neighbors. It is hard to see any signs that he can be trusted or that he's inclined to back down or give anything up. What are your expectations of him?
Well, our major objective is to finish the war by saving all people that we can, without any risk to our territorial integrity, which means that we're going to fight for our people, for our territories, for democracy, for the human rights. And it is our right to defend ourselves. So at this stage, there is no much of expectation, but what is happening now, every country should be re-evaluating what it has done for the last 10 years with this country. Because nowadays, when we see on our fields tanks, aircrafts with so many Western parts supplied to Russian Federation, and for the last 8 years, when the world was saying don't supply defensive weapons to Ukraine, it makes us feel bad. So that is why we have to reevaluate what is being done now, what has been done before, to avoid this, because today's bloodshed has been taken, the decisions has been taken before. So my concern is that there is no expectation. Our major focus has to stop the war, and the world should be, besides Ukraine, helping to supply weapons, helping diplomatically, politically, and financially with Ukraine. Because as I said, we're not only fighting for our own country, we're fighting for the democracy, we're fighting for the human rights, and for the security, for the global security.
Mr. Umerov, thank you so much for speaking with us and taking so much time, and we appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you very much.